I'm Giacomo Picciani. I'm a tech lead working with Bread Digital. I've been working with Bread since 2015, so almost 3 years. It has been a very good experience. A lot of colleagues. I've worked with Mel, and I'm pretty sure you're enjoying him here. Today, I decided to talk about how to build a context-aware application and how to use a new module that has been released in the new version of AM 6.3 that is called ContextAware Configuration. And I decided to split the presentation in 3 main areas. I'm going to talk a bit more about the theory behind context awareness, the reason why researchers they come out with this term context awareness, the reason why and how they come out, and also the core of the presentation. The second part and the third part is going to be all about presenting this module of AM, and also the last one is I decided to give you some use case scenarios, how you can use this module in your application. My goal today, honestly, is not to explain in details the theory, neither the module Sling, but it's actually to give you more a different perspective, or remind you a different perspective, and also give you a more, I guess, standard way to build applications that are aware about the context, that can take advantage of the context itself and behave in a different way according to the context. We all know that context matters. Context matters in our communication. It's actually the context is actually one of the most important things to have the right understanding of a message. When we communicate with friends, when we read an email, when we read an article, context help us to draw conclusion from events. Also allow us to determine if something is true or if it's not true. So context is important in our day-to-day communication, but context is also important in the work we do as developers, software engineer, architect, tech lead as well. What I'm talking about is actually called digital context. I was thinking everyone has a high expectation when we use our mobile phone or when we use our device like a satellite navigation, or when we browse in our favorite e-commerce on the website. We really want that our expectation is that the website, the device, the mobile device needs to understand our context. The satellite navigation needs to understand if there is a traffic and needs to provide me a new route. Okay, our expectation is quite high, and what I was thinking, as a developer, as a software engineer, we really need to think when we build application, when we build component functionality in a front end JavaScript, we really need to think how we can exploit the context and use the context as a resource to actually improve the functionality that we are creating in order to give to the user the best experience. But this has not been like that. Indeed, in the early days of computing, the context of a system was strongly defined by the place where the system were set up. This place was usually office or factory floors, and this location was not changing so much, and there was no need to actually create something that was able to sense, understand, and adapt to the context. But something's changed with the rise of mobile communication, and especially when the users start to bring with them the system and use the system in a different scenario and in different environments. And one of the main challenges they had in the late 80s, early 90s, was how to make that mobility more transparent for the user. And this is the entrance of a Xerox company. And from this company, some research, they were trying to understand how to make the mobility more transparent to the end users, and what they found, for example, to provide network connectivity across a big area like a campus, and the user was actually moving from one network to another network without be aware that it was actually moving from one network to another network. But what they found was actually something even more interesting. What they found in doing this work, they discovered they could the potential of the context of the context of use, the potential to actually take advantage of the context to actually change the way the system was working. And one of the guys that was working in a Xerox, Bill Shillett, put this down in an article, in a paper in 1994 with other person. And he was the first guy that discovered and introduced the concept context awareness. And in this paper that I can share with you at the end of the presentation, he talked about how to create software that was able to adapt to a context. But he also talked about something that was also very important and interesting. He also tried to define what a context is. And this is one of the images from the paper. And he said the context is defined by three main aspects. The first one is where you are. The second one is who you are with. And the third one is what the resources are around you or nearby. All these things all together are defined in a context that can be used to customize your application. And the main point for him, it was not just the location, well, actually more than the location, well, lighting, noise level, network connectivity, communication cost, communication bandwidth, and also he talked about the even social situation. If you were talking with your boss, if you were talking with your colleagues, with the friends, that all these kind of things were defining the context that could be used to change your application. And in these years, technology has evolved. We all know we have all our mobile phone that is very able to understand, sense, understand, and adapt to the context. And also the way we devise technology, sense, understand, and adapt to the context has evolved. And today, what we are looking and see is something even more, is moving the context awareness a step forward. So we are not just able to take advantage of the context, but we are also able to store the context and trying to predict the next context of the users in order to anticipate the user, to give the user the best experience. Yeah, so this is just an introduction of what context means and context-aware application means. Also a really brief history, what is behind this term. And today, the module I'm going to present is actually something that is in line of this kind of thinking. And this module is provided by Sling. Sling is a web application framework based on REST principles, and is used to develop applications that are content-oriented applications. Sling is one of the main modules of AM, Adobe Experience Manager, and it uses a JZR repository as a data store. You can know more about Sling online, but I guess if you're working on AM, you worked a lot with Sling. And one of the modules released a few years ago and now has been introduced, has been put in AM 6.3, is called ContextAware Configuration. This module, the main goal of this module is provide a service API that can be used to to get the right configuration according to a specific context. And when we talk about context, in this context of AM and Sling, the context is the content of your application. So this module is able to give you, according to a specific content path, different configuration. This configuration then can be used to change your application. I'm going to show you some example later on. There are four, the default implementation provided by this module that you can find in AM provide four capability. Define a context from a content, find the context, store the content, and there is also some inheritance capabilities. When we say define a context, it's pretty much easy. You need to define a property in your content repository, and this property is, I don't know if you can read it, probably not, but it's called Sling Config and this property has a value, the path of your configuration, okay? And then the default implementation of the API you can use from your component, HTML or JSP or Java, your bundle. The API is then providing the resource lookup. So is reading the path of is looking for this property and then going to the /conf. There is actually a new node that you can find from AM 6.1, and in there under /conf you can find your configuration that is actually configured in your property. And it's very interesting how it's also quite standard the way the modules try to find the resource, because if you cannot find the resource in the value provided by the property, it's also try to go up to the content, check the parent path, and then go back to the parent configuration and try to see if you can find the configuration. In terms of storage, it uses by default, as I said, the /conf node, and the default implementation is creating node anti-unstructured node, and then saving you can save as property and value, key value. In terms of resource, the default implementation is providing you a single resource, or you can also create a collection of resources, and you can also retrieve if you want to have a list of configuration for a specific content path. This is just an example of the way you can use in your Java code, use the resource resolver. The resource resolver accepts a content path, and then from the content path you can use the adapt to method, and the configuration is then from the resource is then adapted to your class that you recently created. And this is also an example how you can use this service API in your HTML. It's very, very easy. I did some simple project on my own. Really recommend. And then the last one is inheritance. So this default module is also able to, you can inherit resources but also property. That means that when you have the inheritance enabled, when you request a configuration for a specific content, the module is able to merge different configuration and return a single object. It is actually an outcome of merging between property and resource from different paths. So it's very, very powerful. Although the default limitation comes with, the default implementation comes with some limitation, and you can just read from CQ page, but you cannot write in CQ page nodes. That is quite handy when you want to use your API to activate nodes. So you can activate if it is a CQ page or just your content. It's quite difficult if you have if it is an anti-structured. Okay, it doesn't provide any other context path strategy. So the only way to define a context is you have to define a property in your content path. And also it doesn't have any GUI where you can actually see the configuration change from as author okay? And that's why the company WCM.io is actually providing a lot of useful libraries. I created an extension for this module that you can install in AM. And what it provides, a lot of capability, and you can write in a CQ page nodes, context, path strategy, persistent strategy, configuration, editor GUI, and also some override. This is just some screenshot from the GUI that you can use. As you can see the config page. You can also see all the resources available, singleton, collection, and nested resources. You can also change the value. You can enable the inheritance from the GUI. It's very, very powerful. The only thing that they is not doing yet is the replication, but they are working on it. But you can still use the tree activation to replicate. And this is also other capabilities that the libraries provide. One of the most interesting for myself, so is providing new context path strategy. So when you already have a content structure with thousands of pages, it's quite difficult to go through every page and add a property. So what is providing this module is a way to define regex to say this path has this kind of configuration. So this is the first option, absolute parent. But you can also use defined configuration by template. So you can say all the pages that have this template use this configuration in this path. That is also very useful when you have 1,000 pages. Then persistent manager, you can save configuration in CQ pages, but also you can save the configuration not just in /conf, but also in the /content. So you can have your configuration with nearby, at the same level of your content. And also overrides. The default implementation already provides a way to override the configuration through system environments, variables, and also OSGI. So, for example, if you have a way to spin up machine on demand, you can easily reconfigure your environment just providing a list of properties through your system as a variable environment. Okay. And also you can override through an OSGI. In this case, you can also override through an HTTP request. So you can put your property in the head of the HTTP. They do not recommend to enable this on production, but you can enable this on a QA environment, for example, when you need to change on the fly a configuration because you want to, test your application under specific context. So basically, this is the module provided by IM and also the extension provided by WCM.io. The last bit of this presentation is just go through some use cases or scenarios. I thought about three main scenarios. The first one is feature toggling. The second one is A/B testing. And the third one is what I call configuration as a service. There is a way you can reuse your AM configuration as a service, but not to provide the content, but actually to provide the configuration to an external application, pure front-end application or mobile application, or in our case, for example, kiosk in a hotel or a screen TV in a hotel. You can download through a content API different configuration. But the first one is the feature toggling. This diagram is from an article that I found really, really useful from Martin Fowler, and is about feature togglings. He goes through the patterns that you need in order to create application, and where you can actually use feature togglings to release new feature, enable, disable some feature in your production, and this diagram basically you have a different element. The central element is called toggle router. The toggle router is basically responsible to make the decision based on what? On a toggle configuration that is on your right, and also based on a toggle context. So given a configuration and given a context, the toggle router can make a decision, and this decision is made on a toggle point. Is actually the code base where we want to implement the feature togglings. And the ContextAware configuration actually is quite amazing because I actually implement all these patterns, and this is also another proof that what they do for AM is also quite stable and follows some standards as well. So this is an example, very simple example I built on my machine. You can find the code base on GitHub as well. There are 3 websites. And there is a component that is shared across these 3 websites. There is the social component, where you can define the Twitter and the Facebook link. And the screenshot above, you can see there is a standard configuration. So you have a property in your content path that link to a configuration under /conf. And also I put a screenshot of the code base. This is actually the implementation of the social component. And basically what is doing this component is going through each configuration according to the context, and the context is the content of the website, and trying to find if the social component is first enabled. If it is enabled, to try to read the property, the value for Facebook and Twitter. If it is not enabled or you don't have any property, it is providing a default view that is actually shown in the last example. This is very simple, but I hope this is going to give you an idea of what you can build with this configuration. You can actually build components that are able to understand the context, that is your content path, and also define a behavior according to the context defined by a configuration. And you can change that configuration in AM, and you can integrate with your pipeline and release very easy. And for example, if you want to release a new module but only on specific content path, you can do it just enabling this module, creating a configuration for that specific component, and enable that view, for example, only in that specific context. So this is the first example. The second example comes from one of my the latest requirement I received from my SEO manager. They want to run SEO A/B test on the Premiering website on the breadcrumbs components. They want to try different way to display the content. So one is just displaying the name of the location, that is Scotland, blah blah blah, Edinburgh. The other one that they want to try is to add hotels in. Okay, very simple. But the caveat is that it needs to be SEO A/B test. That means it needs to be crawled by search engine. Okay, so that means SEO A/B test is quite difficult than a normal A/B test, because you cannot split your user into different categories. You have to split your page into different categories. The page that has one version of the component and the page that has a different version of the component. And the way you can do it is you can define different contexts in your content path and enable the configuration in your breadcrumb, and then configure the behavior in a different configuration. And according to the context, you can build your server-side component. So it's going to be on the server side, the search engine is going to crawl the page, and for specific content path, it's going to crawl a specific version of the breadcrumb. For other path, can crawl at the other version of the breadcrumb. And in that case, you can define which one is the winner according to your the SEO measurement. So this is another example. And the third one is configuration as a service. We all know that AM from 6.23 is providing this new capability, content service. some company, Webred as well, is already using IAM under specific, for specific application as a headless CMS. That means that we use IAM just as a content provider. IAM is not responsible to build the UI of the application. In this case, you can also reuse and customize your Java code. Maybe you can create a specific selector that is able to reuse the ContextAware, the modules provided by Sling, and expose the configuration through an API and create a JSON object for that configuration that can be stored in a CDN and they can be retrieved by different consumer. One example is if you have it's coming from the website I'm working with. We have a search result page, and the idea in the future is that we would like to change the layout of the page or the content that we display on the page according to the location you're searching. So if it is London, if it is Edinburgh. In this case, you can enable a content API in IAM and define an API where when you are searching for London, you can request like content/search result/London, and then that is retrieving, is giving you a JSON object that is your configuration, and you can reconfigure your application that is pure front-end according to that configuration, enabling, disabling some part of the page, or displaying new content, and so on. Yeah, so basically I'm almost done. So we went through the theory of context awareness. We saw the module provided by IAM, the default implementation. We also saw that you can install in IAM a new libraries that is actually giving you more capabilities. And also we saw different user journey or scenario where you can use this module. I'm done, and if you have any question, I'm happy to take it.